At this time, I'd like to call this meeting to order. Good evening, everyone. Today is Thursday, August 25th, 2022, and this is a meeting of the Rent Stabilization Commission for the City of West Hollywood. We would like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which we gather, currently known as the City of West Hollywood, is the occupied unceded seized territory of the Gabrielino Tongva and Gabrielino K'iche' peoples. Vice Chair, would you like to lead us in the pledge?
Sure. Please place your right hand over the heart. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Ms. Secretary, may we have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Kirpies?
Present.
Commissioner Maggio?
Here.
Commissioner Martz?
Present.
Commissioner Montemayor?
Here.
Commissioner Wright is absent for tonight. Vice Chair Ayers?
Here.
Chair Topchin?
Here. We have a quorum. Approval of agenda is next, and has anyone had the chance to review the items before us tonight? Do we have a motion?
To approve the agenda?
I'll make
Yeah.
a second.
All right, so we have a motion to approve and we have a second. Ms. Secretary, may we have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Kirpies?
Aye.
Commissioner Maggio?
Aye.
Commissioner Martz?
Aye.
Commissioner Montemayor?
Aye.
Vice Chair Ayers?
Aye.
Chair Topchin?
Aye, motion carries. Thank you, everyone. Approval of minutes is next. We have the minutes for the meeting on August 11th, 2022. Has everyone had the chance to review them?
So moved. I make a motion to move the minutes
Second.
of August 11th, 2022.
2022. Okay, so we have a motion to approve the minutes, and we have a second. Ms. Secretary, may we have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Kirpies?
Aye.
Commissioner Maggio?
Aye.
Commissioner Martz?
Aye.
Commissioner Montemayor?
Aye.
Vice Chair Ayers?
Aye.
And Chair Topchin?
Aye, motion passes. Thank you. Public comments, Ms. Secretary, are there any speakers at this time?
No speakers at this time.
Okay, we don't have any speakers. Moving on to the next item, which is the manager's report. Rent Stabilization and Housing Manager, Mr. Hollop, may we have a report this time?
Certainly. Good evening, Chair, Vice Chair, Commissioners. Jonathan Holla, Rent Stabilization Manager. Taking a look at the look-ahead calendar, there was an appeal on calendar for tonight, but the appellant withdrew that. So it'll just be a couple items from staff. We'll be announcing the interest rate on security deposits and also giving a presentation and looking for a recommendation on proposed RRSO and regulation amendments. As you can see from the calendar, you're fairly booked for appeals going forward right through till the end of October. I have no update currently from BetSedec on eviction rates since the last meeting. I anticipate I'll probably have something for the next meeting. I also wanted to mention, give a little report on what occurred at the last council meeting on August 15th. So staff brought an item related to the rent increase freeze and the AGA that the commission announced back in June of 6%. So staff had been directed by council to come back with recommendations related to the rent increase freeze. And so there was a presentation given on that, and also staff's recommendation that the AGA be reduced from 6% to 3%, which is more in line with past AGAs. As you are probably aware, 6% is the highest AGA that's ever been announced in the city's history. Council directed staff at that time to come back in 60 days with a item that actually would cap the AGA at 3% universally. So currently the RSO indicates a 7% cap, and then for the council to review if it ever goes higher than that. But council decided that 3% would be adequate, and so staff will return with that item. They did ask that during the 60-day period that staff reach out to landlords and tenants alike to find out what the impacts would be of ending the freeze and establishing this cap. So staff is working on putting together workshops where we can bring in tenants and landlords separately to explain their positions, and also we'll be creating a survey, and information about that survey will be going out with our newsletter, which is going out shortly. It'll be both available online and in paper, and I'll have more to talk about regarding that at the next meeting. And I'm available for any questions.
Thank you, Manager Hall. Commissioners, do you have any questions regarding the report? Commissioner Martz?
Yes, excuse me. I'm wondering when one of the parties withdraws their appeal, do we ever ask why?
Actually, we don't usually ask why. We do, as a preliminary matter, sometimes inform parties of their options other than appealing, and sometimes they take staff's advice and sometimes they don't. And so, you know, but we try to explain the options as best we can.
Because I'd be curious if we collected enough data to, you know, see if there's some city policies we can put in place, you know, if they need follow-up or if they need mediation between them, maybe not as official as this. I'd be interested in, you know, seeing that if city staff thinks it's a good idea.
I do, actually. So, you know, when it happens again, well, actually, with this last one, I'll ask staff to see if they're willing to communicate with us about why they did it.
Perfect, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Other commissioners? Commissioner Kerpis.
Do we currently, I feel like we worked on this before, but does the city have a citywide rent registry in place, or are we working on something like that where all units, regardless of whether they fall under the RSO or not, are registered?
Yes, well, it's not in place yet. Council passed that amendment to the RSO in February with an implementation date of January 1st, 2023. So staff is working on developing that program, and the rollout will be starting pretty soon.
Thank you.
Right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Manager. Thank you, commissioners. Since we don't have any appeals tonight, it's been canceled. We are moving on to the next item, which is the new business. And oh, I'm sorry, I skipped that. I have this before me. Commissioner comments. Would you like any commissioners to make any comments at this time?
I have.
Commissioner Margeau, please. Thank you, Vice Chair.
I wanted to bring this to the Commission's attention, some data that I researched this week from actually Bank of America, who uses a company that analyzes rents, Zumper, Z-U-M-P-E-R, if you would like to Google it. And after a minor slowdown in rent rises in June and July, national index from Zumper indicated a return to significant price hikes. Nationally, according to Zumper, the typical rent for a one-bedroom apartment is now $1,450, up 2% from previous months, and 11.3% from previous year. The median price for a two-bedroom home, for instance, in July was $1,750, which is up 2% from the previous month of 9.3% from previous years. The largest rent increases are not found where we normally think along the national coastlines, but rather in Arizona. And according to data from Bank of America Corp. And Zumper, which share a July median rent payment for the 10 most populous metropolitan areas in the United States. You might be surprised that Los Angeles is number 10 with 2 to 3%. Number 9 is New York City with 4%. Boston, Massachusetts, 4 to 5%. Miami, Florida, 4 to 5%. Chicago, Illinois, 4 to 5%. Houston, Texas, 6%. Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, 6 to 7%. Dallas, Texas, 10 to 11%, Atlanta, Georgia, 11%, and Phoenix, Arizona, 15 to 16%. But I'm sure that in Arizona will change in 10 years, since the temperature there will probably be 130 degrees because of climate changes. But I thought it would be an interesting update to bring to the attention of the commission tonight. Thank you.
It's very interesting. Thank you, Commissioner. Very informative. Other commissioners? Anything at this time? Vice Chair, please.
I just want to report that I did attend the meeting of the Senior Advisory Board for August, which was yesterday. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. As I mentioned, we don't have any appeal this evening. We're going to move on to the new business item. And under the new business, we have the announcement of interest rate on security deposits held calendar year 2022, and we have the staff to report on this. Who's gonna do that?
Good evening, Chair, Vice Chair, and Commissioners. I'm Yasmin Spiteri, Information Coordinator with the Rent Stabilization Division.
Thank you.
One second while we get the presentation queued up.
I apologize for the technical difficulties. It will be fixed now. There you go.
Okay, we're back in business.
Yes, Yasmin, thank you.
Every year, the Commission announces the interest rate to be paid for security deposits held by landlords during that calendar year. Section 17.32.020 of the West Hollywood Municipal Code requires interest rate to be paid on an annual basis, and the interest rate is announced before September 1st of each subject year. The calculated interest is either paid to tenants directly or offered as a one-time rent reduction before February of the following year. Beginning with calendar year 2022, the rate is calculated by averaging the interest rates for savings accounts of 5 online FDIC-insured banks and rounding to the nearest tenth of 1% as listed on bankrate.com, or a similar consumer financial services company in August of each year. The banks chosen for this calculation are those that have savings accounts with the highest annual percentage yield and require no more than a $500 minimum deposit. This year, the banks and rates used to determine the 2022 interest rate were CIT Bank with a savings account earning 1.9% annual percentage yield, Capital One with a savings account earning 1.7% annual percentage yield, Marcus by Goldman Sachs with a savings account earning 1.7% APY, and Barclays and Synchrony Banks, each with a savings account earning 1.65% APY. So using these numbers, the average came out to 1.67%, and rounding to the nearest tenth of 1% results in a rate of 1.7% for security deposits that are held by landlords during calendar year 2022. Wanted to provide some background information here on the interest rate formula for those who may not have been here for that discussion. We've discussed it over a number of different meetings, and so let's go ahead and get into some background. Last year, the rent stabilization regulations were amended to reflect the new security deposit formula. This 1.7% interest rate amount is the first time in 9 years that landlords will be paying an amount to tenants, as the previous formula had resulted in a 0% interest rate for many years. Previously, the rent stabilization regulations calculated the average interest rates of regular passbook savings accounts at 5 banks that had brick and mortar locations within the city boundaries of West Hollywood. The average was then rounded to the nearest quarter of 1%. That calculation resulted in a range of 0 to 5% from the years 1994 to 2021, with the last 9 years, as mentioned, being 0%. In October 2019, the Commission expressed interest in adjusting the formula, considering there are many more online and other options available to West Hollywood residents. Commissioners inquired in the October and subsequent commission meetings about considering a change to rounding from a quarter to a tenth of a percent, examining online savings accounts, as well as 6-month and 12-month certificate of deposit or CD accounts, and making sure that we looked at FDIC banks. Staff came back with information about all of those requested topics, including that the interest rate average being historically rounded to 0.25% was because of how we calculate the AGA, or the annual general adjustment. We also round to 1/4%, but that is something that Commission is able to change in the calculation, which we see in the amendment. CD accounts were reviewed, and although they provided comparable rates, there were concerns about the impact it would have to liquidity of funds for landlords. And staff also confirmed that any banks we used in the new formula would be FDIC insured financial institutions. One other question we received was about the use of the website Bankrate, why we had chosen that website. Bankrate is a well-established online financial services and monitoring company, providing interest rate information since its establishment in 1976 and has maintained its online presence since 1996. Hundreds of top publications rely on Bankrate, such as Wall Street Journal, USA Today, the New York Times, CNBC, and Bloomberg, for getting information about many different financial rates and other information. It's also free to users, which makes it easily accessible to our community members, which is another great point. And to finish out this review on the history of this formula, in August 2021, staff returned with a proposed amendment to the rent stabilization regulations that would codify the Commission's direction on this matter. Resolution number 21-5440 was approved by City Council to amend the security deposit interest rate formula on September 20th, 2021, which brings us back to today's announcement of the 1.7% interest rate to be paid for security deposits held during calendar year 2022. And with that, I open it up to questions from the commission. Thank you.
Thank you, Yasmin. Questions from the commissioners? Commissioner Corpez?
Yes. How does this get notified, or how do residents and landlords get notified about this? And how do tenants receive or reduce their rents for this amount?
So this will be announced in the upcoming newsletter mentioned by Jonathan, and we will also be putting out information on our website and doing a press release about this change in the security deposit formula.
And do tenants, do either landlords have to offer it, or do tenants have to accept it by a certain date, or does it expire? How does that work?
They have to offer it by February 1st, or it can be a deduction that's automatically made from their rent amount.
Okay, Vice Chair, please.
Are landlords or business management or property management organizations going to be notified by the city, or is it up to them to read general information announced by the city?
They will be notified through the newsletter.
Okay.
That's specific to landlords, and we'll be making sure to highlight that topic.
Great. And I take it that this doesn't require a vote on the part of the commission? This is just the opportunity for this announcement to be made?
Correct.
Great.
File and receive.
Commissioner Maggio.
I'm curious, because we haven't done this in a while. Has there been a choice with tenants either to receive payment from the landlord or a deduction? I don't remember how we've done that. Could you answer that?
Yes, so they either receive, I'm just going to read it here from the regulations. It must be the payment must be made directly to the tenant by the landlord, or a credit towards the rent given by February 1st.
So they have a choice.
Yes, if the landlord doesn't choose for them.
The landlord has a choice.
Yes.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you. Commissioner Montemayor?
The newsletter is just physical, correct? Is a mail?
It's mailed out to all the tenants and landlords, and then we also make it available online.
Has staff considered trying to compile emails or requesting emails from all the landlords, and that way we could electronically communicate with them as well?
Yeah, we do have access to some of that information through our HDL online, where all the landlords register their tenancies. So we do have access to that information.
And is there information added to the press release? Or I'm just thinking, it might be a good idea to communicate with them electronically as well, given a lot of people use their emails to receive information.
We're looking into doing some kind of opt-in, because there are some issues with hitting people with electronic
Spam.
communications. Yeah, but it's definitely something we're looking at, because we agree that it is probably the best way nowadays to reach people. Although physical mail also is getting people's attention too, because it's unusual.
Thank you. It is unusual.
Right, Vice Chair?
Yeah, just one more question. Sorry if I missed this, if it was said. When is the newsletter scheduled to go out?
Within the next couple of weeks. Yes.
And Yasmin, this information is going to be in English, Spanish, and Russian, all languages that
Yes.
commonly used in West Hollywood? Yes. All right, thank you. Okay, since this item doesn't require a formal roll call vote, the Commission will just announce the interest rate to be paid for West Hollywood tenants for calendar year 2022 is 1 7/10% annual simple interest. So this is received and filed. Thank you. Thank you, Yasmin. Thank you. I know that, Mr. Manager, the next item, probably you're going to be doing the report, presenting the report, which is the proposed amendments to the rent stabilization ordinance and rent stabilization regulations. Manager Holub.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'm just waiting for it to come on the screen. I'm ready. Yeah. Great, thank you. Okay, so this item is a few amendments, two to the rent stabilization ordinance and one to the regulations. And we're going to be asking for the Commission's recommendation to the Council on these items. So I'll start with the ordinance amendments. So the first amendment is a bad faith rent increase amendment to the anti-tenant harassment provisions of the code. And I'll talk a little bit more about what that means. So what the proposed amendment prohibits is landlords at properties with no form of controls from raising rents in bad faith. And what that means is a rent increase that is substantially in excess of a market rate. This amendment is proposed as part of City Council's effort and the direction to strengthen renters' access to housing opportunities. So this might be the first of several that we'll bring to you. The proposed amendment will protect non-rent stabilized tenants from unlawful displacement. In addition to the clearly excessive increase, the other factor that's enumerated is that if the landlord has tried to evict a tenant within the last 6 months, that can be a factor that's considered by the court if a prosecution or a civil action is initiated under this provision. But it's not limited to those factors. The court can consider other factors, and the Commission may also propose regulations enumerating other relevant factors at a future date if it's deemed necessary. The next item is a relatively technical amendment to the code. It's an exemption for interim or transitional housing from the rent stabilization ordinance. The proposed amendment specifically exempts housing accommodations offered at no cost to people experiencing homelessness, which a government or nonprofit agency owns, operates, finances, or manages. So as you may be aware, there are efforts going on right now to provide interim and transitional housing for people experiencing homelessness, and staff determined that it needs clarification. Although at the moment, such housing would not be considered the type of housing that would create a tenancy, staff believes that the clarity is important so that there's no confusion about what it is. The next item for consideration is Rent Stabilization Regulation 60089, adjustments for security improvements. So I'm going to do a brief overview. This had come to the Commission previously as an informational item, and the Commission decided that it would like to see some revisions made to it, but I just want to give a brief overview to what it is currently, and then I'll talk about what the amendments are. So at present, a landlord may apply for an increase in the MAR for improvements that are made to a building which enhance security. Those are the improvements like fences, walls, gates, exterior common area doors, intercom systems, lighting, people, security bars, locks, and security windows. So if a landlord wants an increase in that for one of those security enhancements, they need to file an application, and it needs to include a description of the proposed security-related improvement, a projection of the cost allocated to each affected unit for the improvement, the proposed monthly rent increase for each affected unit based upon the cost of the improvement and the proposed cost recovery period, and approval of the tenants of at least 75% of the affected units as indicated by the original signatures on the application form. And just as a side note, it's in the report, I know that the Commission had asked for examples. Unfortunately, they don't exist. If they did, they're no longer in our files. We had one letter ending the accelerated cost recovery amount that I'll talk about in a sec, but unfortunately there's just no history. That was one of the reasons that I was sort of advertising it to the commission, because there haven't been many takers. But I apologize, there's just no data really about what has happened in the past at this point. So the approved increases are calculated on the basis of one of the following formulas. It's either by dividing the unit cost of the improvement by the amortization period for security-related improvements, the other choice is to do an accelerated cost recovery, which includes a 5.5% per annum addition, and then the amortization period is divided in half. If the landlord chooses the first one, it's an indefinite increase that exists for as long as the security improvement is in place, and the other one ends when the cost recovery period ends. These are examples I'd given you before. This is just throwing out an example of a new fence, and the amortization period listed in the regulations for that is 10 years. So if you have a 10-unit building at a cost of $10,000, you're going to come up with an $8.33 per unit per month rent increase, which again would not end so long as the fence was in good shape. And then the other formula, what you see is a more significant per month increase of $17.58, but it would end after 5 years. So as I mentioned, there was a presentation to the commission, and these were the three main concerns that the commission expressed: that the regulation allows the annual general adjustment to be applied to the rent increase amount related to that improvement cost, that increases could exceed 10%, which is not consistent with current state law, and that the increase continues beyond a change in ownership. In light of those suggestions and concerns and the feedback that the commission gave to staff, these are the recommendations that staff has for amending the regulation. One is to convert any cost pass-through for security-related improvements to a temporary surcharge as opposed to a temporary or permanent rent increase. That the surcharge remain in effect only through the amortization period. That the available formula be only the one that I listed as number one before, that takes the entire amortization period in order to ensure a lower monthly cost to tenants. Make sure that the surcharge never exceeds 10% of the total rent at the time the surcharge is imposed, and also permit a waiver for any tenant that wasn't among the 75% and can show that the housing costs would exceed 30% of their income. Also, it would specifically exempt the surcharge from the MAR, because it is a surcharge, not an addition to the maximum rent, and the AGA. So it just takes it out of that completely, and the surcharge would be terminated upon a change in ownership or subsequent tenancy. With the latter, that would have occurred anyway with a vacancy, but the regulation amendment recommended spells that out, so there's no confusion about what happens when the tenancy ends. Most of the process would remain the same following the submission of a completed application. The division would determine if the building and the proposed improvements qualify for a surcharge. All the tenants would be noticed, advising the tenants of the work that has been proposed, stating the amount of the surcharge that will be approved for each unit upon satisfactory completion of the work. And within 10 days of the mailing of the notice, any affected tenant may object to the proposed increase, and the objection has to be based on the fact that there was something fraudulent about the signature collection process. And if there's some lack of clarity about what happened, an evidentiary hearing can be held by the division. Once the work is completed, the applicant, the landlord, will provide proof of completion of costs to the division, including bills, receipts, proof of payment, and photographs of the completed work. And upon receipt of the documentation, the division will approve and issue a notice of surcharge for each affected unit in accordance with the standard formula. And the standard formula, again, this is just reiterating that. It's, if you took that example, this is what would happen instead of but instead of it being an $8.33 per unit per month rent increase, it would just be a surcharge for 10 years. And available for any questions.
Thank you. Commissioner Maggio?
Yes, Jonathan. For instance, let's say it cost $100,000 to install all this security. Doesn't the owner or the landlord have a right to deduct any of this on their taxes? Could this be a write-off?
I don't know.
Because I'm thinking if they're already benefiting from a write-off, then why would they want to pass the charges on?
I'm not familiar enough with the tax benefits or liabilities to say for certain whether that specific $100,000 would be a write-off. But you know, we're not taking that into consideration, obviously. That's certainly something we could consider if that's what the direction the commission wants to go in. Obviously, it wasn't in the current regulation. We didn't ask whether or not the landlord was getting a write-off for that particular improvement. But if the commission wants to prevent, for example, the landlord from using this program if they're getting a write-off for the same work, then that's certainly something that can be added.
Interesting. Well, other commissioners, any thoughts? Commissioner Martz?
Yes. For the pass-through, when the landlord submits the invoice, goes to the rent stabilization division, they approve, they send out a notice to the tenants that it's coming their way. What's the time frame? Once that notice goes out, is it the next rent payment that would be?
The landlord would be well, it's a surcharge, it's not a rent increase, but we would advise the landlord that they would have to give a 30-day notice.
Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioners, Commissioner Kurbis?
Yes, I have a question kind of about the this security program to enhance the security on buildings. You mentioned before that not many people know about it. You brought it to the commission. So are there plans to advertise it in the future? Neighborhood count or neighborhood watch groups or anything like that?
Yeah, we would certainly be advertised, especially, you know, particularly if even if the commission doesn't take staff's recommendation, you know, this would be something we'd probably advertise. I hadn't thought of the example you gave, but we could certainly do that. And if you make the changes, certainly we would advertise it.
Chair, I just had one additional comment. So I really thought that we would be handling this like we did retrofitting, where the owner, you know, it's a business, and so they're allowed to write it off. But I would think we might want to consider the same formula here.
Yeah, I think we can discuss that if you know, if commissioners would like to specifically make any comments about that.
I think this is a little bit different in that I think this is a program where the tenants can come to the landlord and say, hey, we're thinking about this. Would you mind enhancing the security around our building? Because it is have a 75% tenant approval, or 75% of the tenants must ask for it or sign off on it. So this is, I see, as more of a way tenants can make their building more secure rather than the other way where the city is mandating that landlords provide earthquake upgrades to their building. Can't speak tonight, sorry.
Is this program works the way that the tenants will basically come forward with the request, or the landlord could initiate this process?
Well, the application would have to be filed by the landlord, but certainly if a group of tenants had a concern, and that's the benefit of advertising it and making the public aware of it, is that if tenants have particular concern about a security issue on their property, they can go to their landlord and discuss if they can say, well, we can get 75% of the tenants to agree to this, and then they can get their landlord to actually do it, and then the landlord gets the benefit of the surcharge. And the division can also provide free mediation services to help that get facilitated as well.
So this is, in a sense, similar to capital improvement program?
Well, it's different. It's different because so is the retrofit. Because the retrofit, the benefits that come from doing a retrofit as they relate to rent increases is still a rent increase application, just like capital improvements. So this is really a very separate thing from that, particularly if the commission goes in the direction of a surcharge approach. And also to your point that I think you made a moment ago, this is taking the tenants' concerns and buy-in into consideration, whereas with whether it's seeking a rent increase for a seismic retrofit or for any other capital improvement, that's something that's unilateral, that the landlord just does on their own, and then if they want to seek a rent increase after the fact, they can file for a rent adjustment application, or for capital improvement theoretically before they actually do the work, but they still have to go through that process. So it's quite a different it's different from retrofit for sure, but I think I see kind of similarity with the capital improvement, although the capital improvement, it can be exterior or interior of the, let's say, unit or the building. This talks about the exterior, I guess, issues. But is the capital improvement a surcharge or is it a rent increase? I'm just trying to compare. It would be a rent increase.
Rent increase, capital improvement,
Right.
Rent increase.
Yeah.
Okay. I still like the idea of preventing sort of the landlord double dipping the charges if there will be a write-off, a tax write-off, and then imposing a rent increase. So I kind of like the idea. I don't know if it's possible to recommend something. You said that the commission may discuss, but let's hear what Commissioner Montemora has to say.
I would want legal counsel to weigh in on that first. But second, just how any LLC or business is run, you have a profit and loss statement. And so I would imagine for any of these LLCs who are managing these properties, they're writing off maintenance. They're writing off everything that is required to make sure their buildings are running. And so I'm not quite sure I would agree with moving in that direction personally, but I certainly would love to hear from legal counsel if there's a desire from the commission to move in that direction.
Okay, thank you. Vice Chair, any thoughts?
I had a question regarding the exemption for the transitional housing. If the commission were to approve this update to the RSO, and if council approves it, then would the rent stabilization department work with Essentia or whoever the contracted service provider is to make sure that the people participating in the transitional housing program were fully aware of their rights and their arrangement with Essentia?
It's certainly something I could talk to the division that is working on that project, and absolutely would make that recommendation so that, and I would think it would be beneficial that people who are coming into that program understand exactly what it is. But I won't be overseeing that program or the contract, so I don't want to say exactly what will happen, but I will talk to staff that does oversee that.
Okay. And similarly, if this were approved by council, would then the Rent Stabilization Division communicate this to the Human Services Commission so they have an understanding of the tenant service provider arrangement?
Again, I'll talk to the staff that oversees the liaison for that commission as well. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Moritz?
The tax question here, I think one, it just wades too far into a lot of junk that doesn't get a lot of benefit to landlords or tenants. I think also, how are we going to prove that? I mean, unless we're going to be reviewing all their taxes, they can cheat the system and, you know, we're not getting much out of it. And I think if we're asking them to front the money and they're going to have a long number of years to get that money back, a relatively minor, from my experience, tax write-off is really not something that I would be in favor of imposing as a block to this, because our ultimate goal is to get these improvements to the tenants that want them, whether it's a gate or security features or whatever the case may be. And if we put up quite a few roadblocks, it's going to turn a lot of landlords off from cooperating with tenants who, you know, want these, and hopefully the landlord wants the same type of security system. So I wouldn't really be in favor of that tax
Thank you.
question.
Thank you. Commissioner Curtis, Josh? All right.
No, I have no further comments. I support all the recommendations by staff. Appreciate the report. I think this is the direction that we should be going on all of these items. And I agree with the comments that this is a little bit different than the other capital improvements and the seismic retrofits. Thank you. And this is a different kind of category because, as I mentioned before, I see this as something that, you know, maybe tenant-driven is not the right way to describe it because it does have to come from the landlord, but I think it's more tenant-inclusive in the decision-making and in the direction for security of the building, and an opportunity for tenants to talk to their landlord about that. So I also would not be in favor of getting too deep in the tax questions, and I think that covers all of the items. I'm a little confused, maybe I'm not confused, maybe I'm just confusing myself, but in terms of the interim housing portion, I don't know if I understand your questions, Commissioner. Are you concerned that you just want them to know what the situation is when they go into the interim housing, that this is not the same as moving into a rent stabilized unit or
Exactly.
Okay, thank you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I just have one additional,
Sure. Commissioner Marjorie.
just for clarification. So let's say you have a 10-unit building and there's going to be a gate put in and that benefits everyone. But 5 of the units that are on the bottom floor say, well, that's not enough for us. We want bars now on our windows. How would that be handled? The ones that need the bars would have to pay extra in addition to the gate?
It could. I think that, you know, it's affected tenants. So if 75% of the tenants who are affected by the security enhancement were to agree to that, then the landlord could apply for that as well for the ground floor folks. But it's 2 separate security enhancements. One enhancement is a fence, and one is bars. And I'm not sure if bars have the same amortization period as a fence, but they'd be 2 separate things, and they'd have to be agreed upon by those tenants who are actually affected by it, or 75% of those tenants that are affected by it.
Yes, because I think it would be separate because the gate's going to be necessary to benefit everyone. And then the landlord might say, well, that's as far as I want to go. But some of the tenants might say, yes, but it's not enough for us. We need even more security. So therefore, we want bars on the windows. I think that's basically what I'm trying to clarify.
Okay, thank you. I just have, first I want to mention that, yeah, Commissioner Marshall, although it was interesting, I think, to have that discussion, but I, after further discussion and comments made by the fellow commissioners, I would agree with Commissioner Montemayor and Commissioner Martz and others. I think we should not open the discussion, and I think that would require a lot of legal review and work, and I don't know if it's going to work this time. So since we don't have the commission support, it seems that we're not going to move forward with making any changes. And other than that, I'm in agreement with the recommendations. But I have a question, Mr. Manager, about the bad faith rent increases. So this is for non-RSO units, and I believe this would not apply to the units that are subject to the state law Assembly Bill 1482. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And would this be applicable to those units that are exempt from AB 1482? And there are exemptions. I don't want to talk about those, but
Right. The big picture exemption is buildings that are less than 15 years old. So those buildings where a landlord could raise the rent to whatever they want, but this would keep it within reason and not be used for an ulterior motive.
right. What about those affordable units that are not subject to rent control? They're not, I mean, obviously, if they're affordable, regulated by TCAC or some HUD program or something, that will not be applicable, right? That will be exempt from this?
They're not going to have that issue because their rents are capped in another way.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Mr. Chair?
And,
Ask about single-family homes.
yeah, and right, the single-family homes. What would be the? I know the AB 1482 would apply to single-family homes owned by, or single-family homes would be. I mean, this will be applicable to single-family homes, or the single-family homes exempt from the AB 1482 or not?
Some are and some aren't. But you know, if it's exempt from any form of rent control, and certainly some single-family, well, a lot of single-family homes are, then again, it would apply to those. So if there's no cap that's applicable to a particular parcel, then this would apply.
Great.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Commissioner Montemayor.
Just a follow-up question. Do we have an understanding of what percentage of our housing stock this would apply to?
Well, most units are under rent stabilization. I think it's about 60% now. What are we at? Yeah, well, 80%, 60 to 80%. And well, 80% rentals. So it's a majority are under either the city's rent stabilization, or are more than 15 years old, so they're going to be under the state's AB 1482. I don't have an exact percentage for you of what's covered under that. I'll have more information about that when we start our full registration program. So we're working on those numbers to get exact figures, but it's going to be a much smaller percentage of the overall rental market.
Sure. I think once the registry is rolled out, I imagine staff will come for presentation, or just because I think some of these figures would be helpful for us and just the public to understand, you know, what our housing stock looks like and what laws apply to which types of housing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's great, because that's the properties or units that are built within this last 15 years. These are newer constructions that are completely uncovered from anything, and I just salute this, and I think this is great, and thank you, in full favor of this item. I just wanted to clarify what's the application of AB 1482. Thank you, Mr. Manager. Any further questions, commissioners? Commissioner Martz?
Yes. Two hopefully quick questions. First is, there's the factors here which are including but not limiting to, so obviously a quarter. Whoever's reviewing this can look at other factors. And I think you said, correct me if I'm wrong, that if we need to put more in there, that may be something that can be done down the road. I would urge that to happen. I know that every time I, review things, the more factors I have to balance and do my review is really helpful. And I think it helps landlords and tenants to just go through a little checklist and be like, did I do this? Not, as opposed to kind of an open-ended question. So I don't think that's necessary now, but I think it's always helpful. And then another clarifying question is, this is only when a landlord would be attempting to recover possession. So but it's not necessarily prohibiting a rent increase that I'm just trying to, it's rent control and AB 1482 have specific numbers that say, when I send you a rent increase, it is this % or less. That's not necessarily what we have here, correct?
Right.
Okay.
There's no exact percentage.
Right.
It would just be, if in proving the case, the court or, the city or the plaintiff would look at comps, I think.
So in this case, it's potentially just a warning to a landlord not to creep past whatever imaginary line that they see as being inappropriate under these factors. So great, thank you for that.
Yeah, and it's still, thank you for clarifying that. It still provides the protection, which currently they don't have any. So although it doesn't really set like a regulation on the increase. But thank you for clarification. All right, commissioners, do we need to vote on this? All right. Okay.
Yes,
Okay.
the staff is looking for a motion to recommend these items to the city council for adoption.
All right. So anyone would like to make a motion, commissioners?
A motion.
Commissioner
I'll make a motion
Mayor?
to approve the amendments as proposed by staff.
Okay.
I'll second.
We have a motion and we have a second. Ms. Secretary, we are ready for roll call, please.
Commissioner Kirpies? Aye. Commissioner Maggio?
Aye.
Commissioner Martz?
Aye.
Commissioner Montemayor?
Aye.
Vice Chair Ayers?
Aye.
Chair Topshin?
Aye. Motion carries. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Ms. Manager. I think this was really interesting, and it was just very necessary, needed changes, amendments to the RSO and regulations. Great job. Thank you. All right. Next is items from staff.
No further items
Any
from
additional?
staff.
None. All right. Ms. Secretary, any public speakers?
No speakers at this time.
Okay, we don't have any speakers. Items from commissioners. Commissioner Martz?
I just want to wish my mom a happy 70th tonight. She's a frequent watcher. She's out at dinner tonight with neighbors, but happy birthday to her.
Happy birthday to your mom.
Your mother, she's a Leo. That's why you turned out to be so charming, right?
All right.
We have commissioners' comment. Did
Yes,
we do that?
it's now Commissioner Maggio.
Well, I voted yes for this. I still didn't feel I was satisfied. Because, for instance, if an apartment was $500 a month because it was rent controlled, and then suddenly that person left that rent controlled apartment, and then the owner could rent it for $2,000 a month, should that still apply? And I think that was still my last concern. But I think once this goes to council, I think they will kind of weed those thoughts out. But that was my concern. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Other comments from other commissioners? Commissioner Kirpies.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank staff for bringing these items to the commission to suggest these items. One of the items I think originated from the city of San Francisco creating that, what are we calling it, the bad faith increases. This might just be a stretch, but I would hope that if there's things that West Hollywood could stretch or kind of push the bar on, that it'd be great to see the city to do that in select cases where they think that they have a good argument to do that. I know that they've done that over the years, different times. I just can't think of anything recently that they've done. So, as more and more, as prices go up, we'll have to look for new, innovative ways to protect tenants. And so hopefully the city will be a leader in that. Thank you.
Thank you. Vice Chair?
Oh, did you have something?
Commissioner Martz?
I have one.
You scared everyone.
I have one more comment. AB 2559 is on its way to the governor, which is the Reusable Tenant Screening Reports Act. And it was amended in a way that is less helpful to tenants, but I still think it's a great bill. And a lot of times, each landlord can say, I'm going to pull a credit report on you, and you get turned down, and you might spend hundreds of dollars trying to get one, get a unit over a couple months. This says that tenants can buy their own reusable credit report and screening report and present it to landlords. The change was that would be a requirement, and now it's optional. And then they're going to see for a while to see how that works. But I think there's a lot of landlords out there that don't really care. Especially mom and pops might be like, sure, if it's within the last week or two, so be it. I had discussions with some of staff of maybe bringing this forward for a discussion item here and seeing if we can do our own version of that in West Hollywood, either equal or stronger. So, but I always like to see things going through the legislature that apply to the whole state, even though we're very progressive in protecting our people, not as many cities are. So statewide changes are great to see.
Thank you.
Yeah, briefly, I just also wanted to add to the comments of appreciation for the work done and the direction being taken to the updating the RSO. I think all of this is really important, and I know that we're planning on having our first, I think, facility for transitional housing with the Holloway Hotel, and I think updating the RSO to make that service exempt from the tenant protections is really important, not only protecting the city, but protecting whoever the contracted service provider is, but also protecting the participants in that transitional housing program. The service provider will need to move people in and out of that facility as needed, and anything that the city can do to help support them in that, like this update to the RSO, will help make their program successful. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioners, for the comments. Well, at this time, since we don't have any items on the agenda, this meeting is adjourned until the next meeting of the Rent Stabilization Commission, to be held on September 8th, 2022 at 7 p.m. here in West Hollywood Park Public Meeting Room, Council Chambers. Thank you, everyone, and good night.
I know it's you, Nick. Sabadoo? John Hamm. Gentlemen, I don't sell